guys, Dr. B. Just a little review for exam 1. So first thing, obviously, when you get to the course, you definitely want to check out the exam study guide. This is the bulk of the exam, pretty much everything. A lot of the questions from the chapters and the quizzes you are going to see, so you're going to want to definitely review those. And the way that you would review those would be to go to McGraw-Hill Connect. That's the site that's going to look something like this. You would log in with whatever your login was, and you wouldn't look at it that way. That's how you would look at all the responses. So if we go through this kind of just to give you clarification, I'm not going to read all these, but I'm going to give you a little more detail on some of them, and then I'm going to show you some actual questions from the exam. So obviously there's questions here about the difference between atoms and molecules and compounds. And to give you like an example of what that would look like, this just happens to be the first question on the exam, which is asking you to see if you understand the difference between atoms and molecules and compounds. Parts of an atom, I covered that in the lecture part. Isotopes, you want to definitely have a good idea about what those are. Obviously, atoms differ in the number of neutrons. Characteristics of different chemical bonds, I covered that in lecture as well. Also on the PowerPoint, it's there, and also on the Edpuzzle lecture, and also on the homework. So it's several different places. Understanding the difference between covalent and ionic bonds is important. Polar and nonpolar molecules, obviously water is polar. It has an unequal sharing of electrons, and therefore it has areas that have different charges. And I embarrassed myself in lab yesterday by being a water molecule, so hopefully that will remind you of what that is. As far as the pH system, you definitely want to review and make sure you remember that the pH numbers that are lower than 7 are acids, and they typically are acids because they have a higher percentage of protons than they do hydroxide ions or OHs. And bases have a higher relative percentage concentration of OHs than Hs. A little more than that, but that's definitely it. And buffers are going to, again, be things that resist changes in pH. Our blood has a buffering system, which is important. A lot of other things do as well. So structure of the plasma membrane. This is now part of just a weird little kind of thing there that's almost weirdly doesn't fit, but it is what it is, and we'll talk about it more in the next exam. But hydrophilic and hydrophobic parts of the plasma membrane that separate the eukaryotic cells from their environment. The internal parts, of course, are hydrophobic, and the external hydrophilic, and you do want to know a little bit more than that. This part is going to be worth a fair amount of points here. So you definitely want to know, and I put a worksheet called macromolecules to help you with that. So you can kind of put internally the 4 different macromolecules, and then you can put characteristics around it. You'll be asked a question about them, about what those types are, about what their function is, about examples of them. So that's definitely something you want to fundamentally know the difference between. Moving down the list, obviously inorganic and organic, obviously dealing with carbon as being a major energy source and how it gets carbon, whether it's through a CHO or whether it's through something like carbon dioxide, which is not organic. And then obviously I had some Edpuzzles on the organelles. There's no other way to say it. You're just going to have to know what these are, what their major functions are, straight up. As well as different parts of plant cells. So let me go ahead and share a couple different parts of the exam to give you an idea kind of what you're going to see. So I'm going to show you some of the more difficult questions. There's no use in showing you some of the easier ones. So this is one of the harder questions about fats, obviously one of the 4 macromolecules. So it's expected that you'd know an answer like this about a saturated fat. We know in diets about them. I'm clearly not going to give you the answer, but you can go ahead and look that up. Let me give you another one. This is another question you may have seen somewhere, hint, hint. But clearly it's asking about the formation of a certain type of molecule by a certain process. And we can see here there's a glycerol and 3 fatty acids are separated, and then they're together, and it releases water. So that's one example. Again, this is a more difficult one. Here's one to kind of give you a hint on the sequence of how material would be destined to be secreted from a cell. And so it obviously expects that you not only know these organs, but kind of where they are. Let me now give you some help on some of the larger point questions. Everything multiple choice, by the way, is 1.5 points. These are worth a few more points. I'm going to have a couple of these filled in for you. I'm also going to have a part of the periodic table on the test, so this should be fairly easy points for some of you. You know, so for example, like if I had the word like hydrogen, by the way, you're not going to have that one. You'd be expected to know all these values. Or I might have one that has something like, 8, and you'd be like, oh, atomic mass 8, oh, oxygen. And then complete all the rest of these. So that's going to be of more points. I'm also going to have a chart. This is obviously the pH chart. I'm going to ask you some questions about which of these values might be neutral, which might be acidic, which might be basic, things like that. And finally, this shouldn't be a surprise. You're going to have a chart that looks kind of like this to go ahead and help with that. One little clarification too, the stuff that I did in lab with osmosis diffusion, that won't be necessarily on this exam. That will be on the next exam. I spend a lot of time on that. You're going to see why, because that's worth a lot of points on the second exam. So in terms of the osmosis diffusion stuff, because that was a lab, that won't be on this exam, but it will be on the next, and it will be on a lot of the quizzes and the homeworks, and it's worth a lot of points for the next exam, and I like to cover it over 2 lectures, so that's why I did that. But in the meantime, hopefully this gave you a little better idea about what you're going to see, and obviously I curved this exam by doing what I just did, which is giving you about 5 or 6 questions. So that's how I curve it, because you should just go back and figure out what those answers are. And if you have any questions this week, let me know. All right, bye.